farther east I drove, the worse the rain got. It wasn't just falling, it was moving sideways, shoved by wind hard enough to make my car drift when a gust hit the wrong angle. Headlights smeared into white streaks on wet pavement. Taillights ahead of me looked doubled, like the road couldn't decide what was real. A cheap bouquet rode on my passenger seat, still wrapped in grocery store plastic. My work jacket stunk up the cab with job site dust and wet wood. I'd told myself I'd shower at my dad's place, change clothes, pretend this was normal, even with the storm beating my windows. I kept checking the clock without meaning to. It was already a little after 8. My dad's dinner wasn't a start time so much as a trap. If I showed up late, it wouldn't matter why. It would be late, and that would be the story. The memorial. 1 year. My mom's chair at the table that nobody sat in anymore. The whole thing felt tight, like everyone was waiting for the wrong sentence. Traffic slowed and then stopped, brake lights stacked into a red ribbon disappearing into the rain. I crawled forward until I saw blue lights strobing through the storm. A cruiser sat angled across the lane. Another one was back on the shoulder. The reason was simple and ugly. The road was flooded. Branches and a downed tree leaned into the shoulder. An SUV sat nose down near the edge with hazards blinking, like it had tried to push through and lost. An officer in a rain jacket waved every car into a hard right turn. No debate. No one was getting through tonight. I followed the line onto a narrower road, wipers slapping, knuckles white on the wheel. The detour sign was a cheap orange board that kept trying to fall over in the wind. It felt like the storm had written it. I shouldn't have been out here. I'd been living out of a rented room near Morehead City because the job site was close and the hours were steady. Work was simpler than home. Home meant my dad and my mom's absence filling every quiet moment. My mom died a year ago, Mary Ann Tulliver. After that, my dad and I didn't explode. We just drifted. He kept saying tonight mattered. I kept saying I'd be there. Every visit still carried the same unspoken question. Where was I when it mattered? My phone lit up in the cup holder. Dad. I let it ring once, then hit the button on the wheel. You coming tonight or not? Tom snapped. Yeah, I'm coming, I said. Don't be late, Roy, he insisted. I'll be there, I told him. The call ended. Rain hammered the roof. I stared at the brake lights inching through the detour and felt the urge to turn around, to let the storm be my excuse. But my dad didn't take weather as an excuse. He took it as a measure of whether I tried. The line crawled forward, then stopped again. I checked the clock, then the dark beyond the trees, and made a choice I didn't like. At the next break in traffic, I eased out of line and took the next side road I saw, betting there had to be a way around this that didn't take all night. The side road cut away from the detour like it was trying to hide. For the first half mile, it felt like a mistake. Trees crowded in close, branches whipping in the wind. Water pooled along the shoulder and spilled across the asphalt in thin sheets. The storm kept pushing at the car, and the wipers couldn't clear the glass fast enough to make me feel in control. The clock on the dash stayed in my peripheral vision. I wasn't just worried about being late. I was worried about walking in after it had already shifted from dinner to goodbye, about arriving to a quiet kitchen and my dad pretending it didn't matter while it obviously did. Navigation rerouted the second I left the line of cars. The map redrew itself and offered a long inland loop with a time estimate that made my stomach drop. Even if the road stayed open, I'd still be rolling into my dad's driveway late enough to make a point I wasn't trying to make. Out here, everything was low and flat. Every stretch of darkness could be a field or a canal or open water. Then the air changed. Salt, mud, wet grass, marshland on both sides, black channels cutting through reeds that bent under the wind, A few lights floated in the rain like they didn't belong to anything solid. A small sign appeared on the right, glowing tired yellow. Bait, ice, groceries. I took it as a hint, turned in, and rolled across a gravel lot that popped under my tires. 2 trucks sat near the building, both splattered with mud. The place looked like it survived on locals and storms. I ran inside. Warm air hit my face, and the smell of bait and old coffee followed. The bell over the door gave a weak jingle. Shelves held jerky, canned soup, and cheap ponchos. Behind the counter, a woman watched me like she'd already decided whether I was worth the effort. "I'm trying to get to the banks tonight," I said. "You're not getting there the way you think," Lena muttered. Her name was on a faded tag clipped to her shirt. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just looked at me like someone who'd watched a lot of people get stubborn in weather like this. "I don't see any ferry on the map," I said, trying to stay calm. "You won't. Locals don't look for it that way," she told me. Lena gave me landmarks instead of street names. Follow a drainage ditch line. Stay with it even when the road gets ugly. When pavement turns to gravel, keep going. Watch for a hand-painted sign with a white arrow. Take the lane. Don't miss the last turn because it won't look like a turn. I repeated the landmarks back in my head like a checklist. Ditch line, gravel, painted sign, last turn that doesn't look like a turn. I told myself it sounded weird because I wasn't from here, not because it was wrong. I thanked her and went back out into the rain. Inside my car, everything smelled damp and tired. The bouquet slid a little on the seat, plastic crinkling. I was about to pull out when movement caught my eye near the side of the building. An older man stepped into view, shoulders hunched against the wind, hat brim shedding rain. He approached my window and tapped once with a knuckle. I cracked the window, just enough to hear him over the storm. "If you're taking that crossing, read this first," the old man said quietly. He held out a folded sheet of paper. It looked worn, creased into tight squares, like it had been opened and refolded until the fibers gave up. The corners were soft. There were old staple holes near the top, rust-colored, like it had been tacked to a bulletin board. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me for a beat, then turned and walked back into the rain without hurrying. No story, no warning speech, just the paper, like a tool you hand someone when you don't want to watch them get hurt. I set it on the passenger seat beside the bouquet. I didn't unfold it, not yet. The paper was thicker than regular printer paper, like it had been copied too many times and someone kept trying to make it last. It was damp at the edges from the rain already. I could have unfolded it right there, but my hands were shaking from the cold and the adrenaline of being rerouted. I didn't want to read anything that might make me turn back. Turning back would feel like relief, and relief would come with my dad's silence later. So I left it folded. I pulled out of the lot and followed Lena's directions into the dark. The road narrowed, the shoulder disappeared, water ran in little rivers along the edges, and every puddle looked deep until my tires cut through it. Houses fell away, trees turned into scrub turned into open marsh, flat and exposed. The ditch line Lena mentioned was real. My headlights caught it on the left, a long strip of water reflecting back at me. I stayed with it like it was a guide rail. The pavement broke into patched asphalt, then into gravel. The car shook more now, and I slowed down. The rain thinned for a minute, then came back harder, like the storm was breathing. My phone dropped to 1 bar, then none. Every time I hit a patch of standing water, the steering got light, and I corrected without thinking. I passed a leaning mailbox, then a closed gate, then nothing at all for a long stretch. The road felt less like a route and more like a dare. I kept hearing Lena's last line in my head. "Don't miss the last turn." My navigation started to drift, the blue dot hovering off the road like it didn't want to claim this place. I muted the guidance and drove by headlights and landmarks instead. A mile later, the screen lit up on its own. A map flashed, then a loading circle, then the word recalculating. I didn't touch it. I stared through the windshield and kept driving. Then the hand-painted sign came out of the rain. A brown board on 2 posts, white letters brushed on in a hurry, an arrow pointing down a narrow lane. No official markings, no reflective tape, just paint and certainty. I took the lane. The lane was so narrow my mirrors felt too close to the brush. The bouquet slid again, a soft thump against the door. I pictured my dad setting extra plates on the table, not because he needed them, but because he didn't know what to do with his hands. It didn't feel public. The gravel got rougher and the trees closed in. Then the land opened to flat nothing. The wind hit harder and the smell of salt sharpened. Somewhere ahead through the rain, I saw a sickly yellow glow that didn't move. I drove toward it, throat tight, telling myself it was just a landing, just a shortcut, just a way home before my dad decided I'd chosen not to be family. The landing was a gravel lot and a short metal ramp dropping into dark water. No terminal building, no reader board, no route name. Just a tiny kiosk under one sickly light and a few vehicles scattered like they had all arrived late. My navigation screen still glowed. The blue dot hovered off the lane, jumped, then froze. The map spun like it couldn't decide where north was. I kept my hands off it. I rolled up to the booth. The guy inside didn't bother with eye contact. "Are you paying or turning around?" the booth worker barked. "I'm paying," I said. "Pull up," he muttered. No route, no next sailing, nothing. I slid my card through the slot. He ran it and shoved it back. The gate arm lifted slow, jerking once like it didn't get used much. I drove onto the ramp. Tires hit metal and the sound turned hollow and loud. The ramp flexed under me, and my stomach tightened. The water beside it was black and smooth, reflecting the sodium light in a long smear. On the deck, a woman in reflective gear pointed with 2 fingers toward a lane. Her flashlight hung at her side, unlit. "Park where I point. Don't drift," the deckhand warned. I eased into the lane she indicated. The deck was slick with rain. A few cars sat parked with odd gaps between them. My bouquet slid on the seat and tapped the door. I stopped, straightened out, and killed the engine. For a second, I thought about backing up. Then, the ramp started to rise. It lifted slow and heavy. Water poured off it in sheets. When it met the deck, the impact came through my seat, a deep metallic thunk. Then a harder click followed, sharp and final, like a deadbolt seating into its strike plate. Locked in. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring at the seam where the ramp used to be. 10 minutes ago, I could have turned around and blamed the storm. Now I could picture my dad's face if I called and said I'd bailed. I could hear the silence that would follow. I wasn't driving toward a dinner anymore. I was driving toward proof, toward whether I still showed up when it counted. The ferry didn't care about any of that, but my chest did. I checked my phone. No signal. I set it down and stared at the railing and the black water beyond it. No shoreline lights, just rain and darkness. That was when I remembered the paper. It sat beside the bouquet, damp at the edges. I unfolded it along stubborn creases. The sheet looked photocopied too many times. The ink was thin. 5 rules, short, direct. Rule 1. Kill the navigation once you leave the main road. If it wakes on its own, don't touch it. Let it die. I read it twice and felt my throat tighten. Back on the gravel, when my screen flashed, recalculating, my hand had hovered, then stopped. I hadn't known why. My dashboard screen glowed faintly in the corner of my vision. I didn't reach over. The screen brightened a fraction anyway. then went black the moment I looked at it. Rule 2. Lower your driver's window exactly 1 inch. Listen for wind. If there's no wind, close it and keep it closed until you're off. It sounded like superstition, but the ramp had just locked like a door. I cracked the window down the smallest amount I could manage. At first I heard rain and engines. Then, for a few seconds, I heard nothing. No wind, not even a breath through the crack. My skin prickled. I raised the window and sealed it. Wind hit the glass again. I read the last 3 rules in one pass. Don't follow lantern light. Don't follow a voice that feels familiar. Don't trust the first dock. I folded the sheet and slid it into the glove box, not buried, just placed where I could grab it fast. I told myself it was a checklist. You follow it because the cost of ignoring it might be higher than your pride. The ferry's vibration stayed steady as it eased away from the landing. The deck lights flickered once, then held. I kept my hands on the wheel even though the engine was off, and I waited for the crossing to show me what the rules were for. The ferry moved the way a heavy thing moves when it's trying not to admit it's moving. There wasn't a clean lurch or a big surge. It was a slow change in vibration, a shift in the hum under the deck, like someone turning a knob down and then up again. Rain kept drumming the metal roof above the car deck, steady and mean, and every so often the wind shoved at the open sides hard enough to send mist blowing in. It hung in the air for a second, then vanished, swallowed by the dark. I sat with my engine off and my hands on the wheel anyway. It was an old habit, something I did when I didn't know what else to do with my body. I couldn't make myself relax, not with the ramp locked behind me, not with the water outside looking like a sheet of ink. The rules paper was in my glove box, folded on purpose, placed where I could grab it fast. I didn't open it again right away. I didn't want to stare at it like it was a lifeline. I didn't want to be the kind of person who believed in a piece of photocopied paper from a stranger in the rain. But I also couldn't stop thinking about how it had been right twice already, without trying. The navigation screen waking on its own. The missing wind through a 1-inch crack. That wasn't superstition. That was a pattern. I pulled the paper back out anyway, not to reread it, just to use it. My pen was still clipped in my jacket pocket from work. I flipped the sheet over and wrote along the blank margin with the tip of the pen pressing too hard. On deck, 8:42, ramp sealed, 8:45, pulled away, 8:47. I didn't know if those exact minutes were perfect. The dash clock had been blinking earlier, and my phone didn't have signal to confirm. But the numbers mattered less than the act of writing them down. If I kept track, I stayed in control. If I stayed in control, I didn't spiral into the thing I'd been trying not to feel since I left my rental room. The tightness that came from thinking about my dad at his table, my mom's chair sitting empty, and the way a late arrival didn't count as an accident in his mind. It counted as a statement. I was already building excuses without meaning to. Road closure, storm, detours, a ferry I didn't know existed. None of it would matter if I walked in after the moment had passed. He wouldn't yell, not anymore. He'd do something worse. He'd go quiet. He'd watch me like he was waiting to see whether I understood what I'd done. He'd say something simple like, "We already ate," and it would land like a door closing. I capped my pen and tucked it back into my jacket. Then I started doing the other things I could do, the small, practical checks that kept me from floating off into my own head. Doors locked. I hit the lock button once and listened for the thunk. Interior light off. I glanced up at the dome switch just to make sure it wasn't bumped. Seatbelt unlatched, but the strap still across my lap. If I needed to move fast, I didn't want to be tangled. If I needed to stay still, I wanted something holding me down. Phone face down on the seat. I didn't need the glow. I didn't need to watch it search for bars that weren't there. The bouquet sat wedged between the seat and the door, the plastic wrap crinkled and damp at the edges. It looked ridiculous in this setting, like I'd brought a birthday gift onto a job site. I reached over and steadied it so it wouldn't slide again. My hand brushed the cold glass of the window, and I pulled it back fast, like the window might bite. Outside, the deck lights flickered. Not enough to go dark, just enough to remind you they could. The bulbs were harsh and white, reflecting off wet metal and painted lines that were too faded to be helpful. Water ran in narrow streams along the grooves in the deck, collecting in low spots and vibrating with the engine hum. Every sound carried, every footstep would ring. That was when I noticed movement 2 lanes over. A truck door opened. A guy climbed down onto the deck and slammed the door behind him hard enough to echo. He wore a hoodie with the hood up against the rain and jeans that looked too thin for weather like this. He stood there with his phone held out in front of him, turning in a slow circle, trying angles like he could trick signal into appearing. His posture was all irritation, like the world had inconvenienced him personally and he intended to complain until it apologized. He didn't look like someone who'd stopped at Lena's shop. He didn't look like someone who'd been given a weird paper with rules on it. He looked like a normal person who'd been rerouted and was mad about it. He took a few steps down the lane, still holding his phone out, then paused and stared at the screen with a disgusted little shake of his head. He tried again, closer to the railing, like being near the edge would help. It didn't. He lowered the phone and looked around for an employee, or a sign, or anyone in charge. His eyes landed on me for half a second. I looked away. He muttered something I couldn't hear through the glass, then walked closer anyway. He stopped near the front corner of my car, close enough that I could see rain shining on his hoodie and the pale reflection of deck lights on his cheek. His face was young, mid-20s maybe, the kind of guy who still believed being annoyed was a form of power. He knocked on my window with 2 quick taps. I didn't move at first. I didn't owe him anything. I didn't want to roll down my window and let the cold in, not after that moment of dead air that had made my skin crawl. But he stood there waiting, shifting his weight, not leaving. So I cracked the window a fraction, not a full inch, just enough to hear him. He leaned slightly toward the gap. "This is sketchy as hell," Cody muttered. The name didn't come from him. It came from a patch on his hoodie, stitched in white letters near the pocket like a cheap customization. Cody. I didn't know if it was his real name or just something he wore. Either way, it was something to call him, and I hated that. Names made things feel closer than I wanted. "Then stay in your truck," I said flatly. He stared at me like he hadn't expected pushback, like he expected solidarity. He glanced back toward the stairs leading up to the cabin, then down the length of the deck, then back at my car. "You hear that up there?" he asked, voice tight. I listened. Rain, engine, metal, nothing that stood out. "It's a boat, it's noise," I told him. He made a face, half disbelief and half frustration. Van shoved his phone up near my window like I could fix it by looking at it. No bars, no service, just a blank. "You're way too calm," he insisted. I almost laughed. It would have come out ugly. "I'm not calm, I'm just not moving," I said quietly. He stood there for another second like he wanted to argue. Then he looked away. His shoulders lifted and dropped in a tight shrug. He stepped back from my window and walked down the lane, still holding his phone up, still turning, still testing the air like it might change its mind. I raised my window again and watched the water line on the glass settle. The car felt smaller after that. Not because Cody had said anything important, but because he'd brought a different kind of energy onto the deck. A human kind, restless, demanding, loud in a place that felt like it rewarded quiet. Cody didn't go back into his truck right away. He paced near it, then walked toward the stairwell again. He stopped at the base, looking up like he expected someone to appear and tell him what was going on. No one did. The stairwell door stayed closed. The small window in it showed only dim light beyond. I glanced down at the glove box. The paper sat inside, folded and waiting. I wasn't about to wave a crumpled sheet at a stranger and call it safety. I didn't want to be the guy who warned strangers about rules on a mystery ferry. I didn't want to sound crazy. I also didn't want Cody to do something stupid that would make the night worse for all of us. That thought alone made me tense, because it implied we were in a situation where someone's choices could spill onto everyone else. I didn't like that. I liked contained problems. I liked problems with a clear boundary. A lock either opened or it didn't. A door either swung or it stayed shut. Here, the boundary felt thin. The ferry kept moving. I could feel it in the slow, steady vibration and the faint shift in pitch under the deck. I looked out through the windshield toward the bow. Beyond the railing was darkness. The rain made it hard to see distance, but I should have been able to make out something. A smear of shoreline lights, a faint glow, a line where water met sky. Instead, it was just black, a flat surface with no texture. I blinked hard, then looked again. Same thing. I told myself it was the storm. That's what storms did. They erased edges. They made everything look like it had been rubbed out. But the thought didn't settle right. The air felt too heavy, too still between gusts. The sound of rain didn't change the way it should when you moved away from land. I gripped the wheel again and forced myself back into my routine. The practical things. I checked the locks again. I checked the interior light again. I turned my head just enough to look at the side mirror, where deck lights reflected in small, broken pieces. I watched the rain streak down the glass. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, slow and controlled, the way you do when you're trying to keep your body from deciding for you. I reopened the glove box and pulled the paper out, not to reread it, but to remind myself it existed. I ran my thumb over the fold lines. The paper felt soft at the creases, worn from use, like too many hands had held it in too many different storms. I flipped it over and added another line under my times. Leaving landing, 8:47. I stared at the number. If I was lucky, the crossing would be short. 15 minutes, 20. I could still make it to my dad's place late, but not ridiculous. I could still walk in and take the hit and sit at the table and pretend I wasn't thinking about black water and dead air. Cody's truck door opened again. He climbed in and out like he couldn't decide where to keep his body. He paced, then stopped, then paced again. He looked toward my car like he wanted to ask another question, then thought better of it. I watched him without moving my head much. He was the kind of person who'd break something just by pushing on it too hard. Not because he meant to, but because he believed the world responded to force. The deck lights flickered again, a quick stutter, then steadied. For a second, the shadows between the cars deepened. The wet metal went dull, then bright again. It wasn't dramatic enough to make someone shout, but it was enough to remind me that the light itself was a variable. I heard a sound from above, not a clear announcement, not a horn, something else. A soft scrape, like a chair leg shifting on a floor, muffled by metal and distance. It could have been normal. It could have been the cabin, people moving, furniture shifting as the ferry rocked. But it had a rhythm that made my shoulders tighten. It wasn't words noticed with ears. It was a cadence noticed with memory. A small rise and fall, like a familiar phrase being spoken quietly. The kind of thing you don't hear so much as recognize, like hearing someone hum a tune you haven't heard in years and feeling it hit you in the chest before you know why. My instinct was immediate. Turn my head, look up toward the stairs, confirm, locate. My body leaned a fraction before my brain caught up, like muscle memory trying to take over. I stopped myself. Not by thinking about the paper, not by reciting rules like a prayer, but by doing the one practical thing I could do to interrupt a reflex. I pressed my tongue against the back of my front teeth and held it there, hard enough to feel pressure. It worked in a stupid way. It anchored me inside my own mouth. It gave my nervous system a different signal to focus on. Pain, pressure, something real and present. The cadence above faded, or maybe my attention slid away from it. Either way, I stayed facing forward. I didn't look up. I didn't open the door. I didn't make any sound. Cody moved again, closer to the stairwell, like he'd heard something too. He stood there, staring at the door, shoulders tight, head tilted as if listening. His hand hovered near the handle, then dropped. He looked back down the deck, then at his truck, then at my car. I couldn't tell if he was spooked or just annoyed. Maybe both. He walked back to his lane and leaned against his door, arms crossed, staring at nothing. The rain kept drumming. The ferry kept humming. The wind came and went in hard gusts, then vanished. Every so often, spray blew in and tapped the sides of the cars like fingers. The deck lights held steady for longer stretches now, and that almost felt worse, like the ferry had decided what mood it wanted and wasn't going to change it yet. I added another line to my log, just a dash, just to keep my hand busy. No signal. I wrote it like it was a fact that would matter later, like I'd be able to show it to someone as proof. Then I realized how ridiculous that was. Proof didn't work the way I wanted it to when it came to family. It didn't work the way I wanted it to when it came to grief. You could show up and still be wrong. You could be late for reasons that made sense and still be judged like you chose it. I stared through the windshield at the black water beyond the railing. The world outside stayed featureless. No lights, no horizon, just wet darkness. Somewhere above, something shifted again. A faint sound, a soft pattern, almost a voice, not clear enough to quote, not clear enough to argue with, just clear enough to make my stomach tighten. I didn't move. I kept my hands on the wheel, tongue pressed where I could feel it, eyes forward. I let the moment pass without giving it anything back. That was the new operating system. Not comfort, not logic, not pride. Just rule and routine. Just doing the next right thing and refusing to be pulled into anything else. Even if what tried to pull me sounded like it belonged to my life. The ferry's vibration changed, subtle but noticeable, like it was adjusting speed. The engine hum dipped and rose. Cody looked up again, then away. The deck lights held. Rain kept falling. I watched the time on the dash tick forward and tried not to think about my dad's table, my mom's empty chair, and the quiet that would meet me when I finally got there. The farther we got from the landing, the less the world made sense as a place you could point to on a map. The wind did the same thing. One moment it shoved spray across the open sides of the deck, and the next it fell dead, leaving everything hanging in a wet hush that felt too deliberate. The deck lights flickered offbeat, not a steady blink like a dying bulb, more like a nervous tick. Bright, dim, bright again. Each time they dipped, the shadows between the cars deepened into something that looked thicker than shadows should. Each time they steadied, the wet metal snapped back into sharp, cold detail. I kept my eyes mostly forward and my posture boring on purpose, like I could make myself blend into the lane line. I checked the clock again and wrote another mark on the back of the paper. Not because the numbers meant anything to the ferry, but because the memorial still meant something to me, even if I hated the way it felt, even if I hated what it turned me into. A guy watching minutes like they were debt. I was going to be late. That was already decided by the roadblock and the detour, and my choice to follow a ditch line into marshland. My dad wasn't going to care about the chain of events. He was going to care about the result. In his mind, results were character. You showed up, or you didn't. You made it happen, or you made excuses. I could feel that old pressure in my chest, the same one I'd felt as a kid when he'd stand by the door with his keys in hand, waiting. He didn't shout much. He didn't need to. Silence did the work for him. I stared at the seam of the glove box for a second, remembering the last 2 rules I'd read. Don't follow lantern light. Don't follow a voice that feels familiar. They were written like common sense and sounded like nonsense at the same time. I'd wanted to laugh when I first saw them. I hadn't laughed. The air had made sure of that. Cody was still pacing. He'd stopped leaning on his truck and started drifting up and down the lane like he was looking for a place to put his frustration. He kept checking his phone, raising it, lowering it, turning his body, as if signal would appear if he found the right angle. Every now and then, he looked toward the stairwell door. The small window in it still showed only dim light. It didn't show movement. That didn't seem to comfort him. It seemed to irritate him more. I kept thinking about that moment in Part 4, the faint cadence from above. Not a full voice, not something you could quote, just a shape of sound that made my stomach tighten like my body recognized it before my mind could. I'd stop myself the way the paper told me to, tongue behind my front teeth. Don't look, don't react. I'd done it, and the moment passed. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel watched. The ferry's vibration changed again, subtle but clear, like it was adjusting speed or course. The engine hum dipped, then steadied. The water outside remained black and flat. I still couldn't pick out any shoreline lights. I told myself that was the storm. I told myself the rain ate distance. I told myself it was normal not to see much out here at night. I didn't believe myself. The first time I saw the lantern beam, I thought it was a glitch in the lights. A brighter sweep passing over the deck, like a spotlight swinging. It slid across the wet metal in a slow arc, catching the tops of hoods and windshields, then moving on. It came from above, from the direction of the passenger cabins, angled down like whoever held it was leaning over a rail. It wasn't a quick flash. It wasn't a casual scan. It moved with intent, steady and searching, like it was looking for a specific car, a specific person, a specific mistake. It swept past my lane, and I felt my shoulders lock up. The paper's rule about lantern light surfaced in my mind like a lifeline I didn't want to admit I needed. Lantern means wrong. Stay in the vehicle. Don't follow. The beam moved again, wider this time, and paused near Cody's truck. It lingered there like a finger pointing. Cody saw it. I watched his posture change. He stopped pacing and stood still, head tilted up toward the source. He took one step toward the stairwell, then another, like his annoyance had finally found an outlet. "They're waving. I'm going to ask what's going on," Cody said, trying to act brave. "Don't go up there," I warned. He turned his head toward me like he couldn't believe I'd said that. His eyes were narrowed, not with fear, with offense, like I'd insulted him. "Why, you scared?" he snapped. "I'm telling you, don't," I said, my voice coming out sharper than I meant. I hated how it sounded, too close to pleading, too close to caring. I wasn't trying to be his friend. I was trying to keep the night from getting worse. But Cody didn't have the paper. He didn't have the context. He didn't have the 2 small proofs I had, the kind that turned rules from superstition into a system. All he had was a storm, a dead phone, a ferry that didn't feel official, and a light from above that looked like a chance to take control back. He shook his head once, quick and dismissive, then walked toward the stairwell. I didn't follow. My body wanted to. Every part of me that still ran on normal human logic wanted to get up and grab him by the sleeve and drag him back and tell him he didn't understand. But the paper didn't say to save anyone. It didn't say to be brave. It said to stay. It said not to follow. It said the cost of moving was higher than the cost of looking stupid. So I stayed. I watched Cody reach the base of the stairs. He looked up again toward the source of the beam. The lantern light shifted, pulsing faintly like someone was signaling. Cody put a hand on the stair rail. The metal looked slick. He stepped up, and the beam lifted, drawing him in. He disappeared through the stairwell door. The door shut behind him with a heavy clunk that rang through the deck. After that, the world felt quieter in a way I didn't like. The rain still hit the roof, but it sounded farther away. The ferry's hum was steady, but it felt muffled, like cotton stuffed in your ears. Even the deck lights seemed to hesitate, flickering slower for a few beats and then snapping back to normal. I stared at the stairwell window, waiting to see movement behind it, waiting for Cody to come back down, laughing at me for being paranoid, waiting for a crew member to follow him down and tell everyone what was going on. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. I didn't know how many. My dash clock was a dim green smear in my peripheral vision. I didn't trust it completely, but I kept checking it anyway. I wrote another small mark on the paper's margin, just a dash, like tallying time could protect me. The lantern beam swept the deck again, slower this time. It didn't linger on my lane. It didn't need to. It moved on like it had already made its selection. I kept my hands on the wheel. I kept my eyes low. I kept my body still enough that my muscles started to ache. The hardest part wasn't fear. The hardest part was resisting the urge to do something, to fix, to intervene. My whole life had been built around problem solving, around movement leading to resolution. Sitting still felt like failure. Then the stairwell door opened. Cody came back down. He moved like a man walking out of a cold pool, slow, stiff, shoulders raised. He was soaked, not damp from rain, soaked like he'd stood under a shower. Water dripped off his hoodie sleeves and pooled on the deck under his boots. The weird part was the car deck was sheltered enough that nothing else looked that wet. Rain blew in, sure, but it didn't drench you like that unless you'd been out in it. His face looked pale under the deck lights. His eyes were too wide, not with panic, with vacancy, like he'd just woken up and didn't know where he was. He stood at the base of the stairs for a second and stared down the lanes. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He blinked once. Slow. Then he started walking, not back to his truck, past it. He walked down the line of vehicles like he was searching for something he'd lost. His head turned left and right in small, jerky movements. His arms hung too straight at his sides. Every few steps he paused as if waiting for a cue. Then he moved again. When he reached my lane, he stopped. He stared at me through my windshield like he was trying to see through glass and skin and bone. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the lock. I didn't reach for the paper. I just stared back, keeping my face blank. Cody's lips moved. No sound I could hear, just a silent forming of words. He shook his head once. He blinked again. Then he leaned toward my window, close enough that I could see water clinging to his eyelashes. His mouth opened. "I'm fine. I'm fine," Cody muttered when he returned. The words didn't match his face. The words didn't match the way his hands trembled at his sides like they were remembering something his brain refused to hold. He said it like a line he'd been given, like a password, like something that let him keep standing. "No, you're not," I said. His expression twitched. Not anger, not sadness, something in between, like a momentary glitch. He stared at me for another second, and I got the strong, sick feeling that he was listening to something I couldn't hear, like he was waiting for permission to move. Then he turned away. He walked back down the lane, past my car, past the next, leaving wet footprints that shone under the lights. He returned to his truck and stood with one hand on the door, like he'd forgotten what he meant to do with it. He didn't get in. He didn't leave. He just stood there, breathing hard through his nose like he'd run a mile. I watched him and felt my stomach drop in a quiet, steady way. This wasn't a guy spooked by bad weather. This wasn't someone who'd gotten yelled at upstairs and came back embarrassed. This was someone who'd been changed in a way that didn't require explanation to understand. His body was present. His mind felt delayed, like it was a second behind the world, overwritten. That word came into my head, blunt and ugly, like a file being saved on top of another file. Like you could still see faint traces of the old thing underneath if you looked at the right angle, but the top layer belonged to something else now. I tightened my grip on the wheel and forced myself to breathe. In through my nose, out through my mouth, slow, controlled. If I let panic take over, my body would try to solve the problem by moving, and moving was what the paper warned me against. The deck lights flickered again, and for a second, Cody's truck looked older, duller, like the wet paint had lost its shine. And then the light steadied and the truck looked normal again. I wondered if my eyes were messing with me. Storm fatigue, stress, low visibility, a brain trying to build patterns out of noise. Then I heard it. Not loud, not clear, not even fully formed as words. It was closer than before, and it wasn't coming from above like a normal sound on a boat. It felt like it came through the metal itself, like it traveled along beams and bolts and seams, sliding into the cab through the steering column, through the door frame, through the thin places you don't think about until you need to. A familiar cadence, a small shape of a phrase, the way a sentence rises at the end when it's meant to be gentle, not a question, more like a coaxing. The kind of tone that makes you want to answer even when you don't know what was said. Sir, it didn't have to say my name. It didn't have to say anything specific. It hit the same place my dad's call hit, the same place the memorial hit, the part of me that still wanted to be good, the part of me that still wanted to fix what couldn't be fixed, the part of me that still believed if I just showed up, if I just did the right thing, I could rewind a year and not be too late. My body reacted before my mind did. A small forward lean, a turn of the head, barely started. The reflex to locate, to confirm, to go toward what I recognized. I stopped it. Tongue behind my front teeth, pressure, stillness. I stared straight ahead and let the familiar sound hover at the edge of hearing without reaching for it. I didn't give it a word. I didn't give it a look. I didn't give it my hands on a door handle. Outside, the rain kept coming. Wind shoved at the deck, then died. The lantern beam didn't return. The deck lights held steady for 3 long seconds, then flickered again, offbeat, like a pulse. Cody stood by his truck, drenched and wrong, staring at nothing. I held my posture, hands on the wheel, and let the ferry carry us farther into dark water, hoping the rules were enough and hating myself for needing them. The ferry slowed so gradually I almost missed it at first. There was no sudden lurch, no clean shift you could point to and say, that's when it changed. The hum under the deck just dipped in pitch, like the engines were easing off, and the vibration in my steering wheel softened until it felt more like a pulse than a constant. My headlights were off. My engine was off. The only movement I could measure was the way the deck lights reflected on wet metal, and even that started to look wrong, like the reflections weren't sliding the way they should. Then the rain stopped. Not tapered off, not thinned into drizzle. It cut out so clean it made my ears ring. 1 second the roof was getting hammered, and the next there was nothing but the ferry's muted machinery and the faint click of water dripping from somewhere higher up. Then the air on the car deck held still, heavy and damp, but without the storm's sound, it felt like the whole world had been muffled. I stared past the railing into the dark. The water was still black, but now it wasn't just black because it was night. It was black in a way that refused detail. No chop, no texture, no faint silver where a ripple caught light. It was like looking at a floor that didn't belong outside. And above it, the sky had no break, no lighter band, no hint of horizon. Water and sky blended into one flat absence. That was when my mind jumped back to the 1-inch window test, the moment of no wind. The way the air had felt turned off, like someone had shut a door you didn't know existed. I didn't open my window again. I didn't need to. The same feeling was back without the crack of glass. It sat in the deck like pressure, like the kind of stillness that happens right before a thunderclap, except there was no thunder coming. Just waiting. The deck lights began to change, not brighter or darker at first, just different. The harsh white shifted toward a pale, tired shade, like old fluorescent bulbs in a break room. The color drained warmth out of everything. Cody's truck looked gray under it, almost colorless, the wet paint catching light in dull patches. The puddles on the deck looked thicker, like oil instead of water. Cody was still out by his truck. He'd been standing there since he came back down from the stairs, soaked and wrong, staring at nothing. When the rain stopped, his head tilted slightly, as if he'd noticed the silence late. He turned slowly in place, not scanning like a normal person, more like he was listening for a cue. No, I kept my eyes forward. I kept my hands on the wheel. I could feel my jaw clenched, and I forced it loose, then clenched again anyway. My tongue pressed against the back of my front teeth without me thinking about it, like my body had learned the position and decided it was safer to stay there. The ferry's hum dipped again, slower now, almost idle. We were still moving. I could tell by the faint shift in the way the deck vibrated, but it felt like we were sliding instead of traveling, like the boat had entered a place where motion didn't work the same way. That's when I heard it. Not from above like before, not from the stairwell. It came from close, from somewhere that didn't make sense, like a voice traveling through steel. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The cadence was clear enough that my chest tightened on reflex. The sound hit me in the part of my brain that stored old comfort. Not the words yet, just the shape of them. Gentle, patient, certain. I swallowed hard. My first instinct was to turn my head and search for the source. That was the trap. It didn't matter where it came from. What mattered was how my body wanted to respond to it, the way my muscles leaned toward it like a plant toward light. "Roy, come on, I'm right here," the familiar voice said softly. I didn't answer. I didn't look. My throat tried to form a sound anyway, like it wanted to be helpful, wanted to prove something, wanted to fix a year of regret in one motion. I pressed my tongue harder behind my teeth until it hurt. No, I muttered. The voice didn't get angry. It didn't react like a person. It held steady, like it had time. "Just for a second," it insisted. The words were plain. That was what made them dangerous. They weren't poetic. They weren't dramatic. They sounded like the kind of thing you'd say from a doorway when you needed someone to come look at something. Like the kind of thing you'd say when you didn't want to make a big deal out of asking for help. For a second, my mind flashed images that weren't mine to see. A kitchen light, a hand at a sink, a chair pulled out at the table. The memory wasn't detailed enough to be real, but it landed with the weight of reality anyway. It hit the lever inside me that said, "If you go now, you can undo it. If you go now, you can show up on time." My fingers flexed on the wheel. My other hand twitched toward the door handle without fully moving. I caught it and forced my palm flat against my thigh. Still. "Don't open. Don't follow." I'm not getting out," I said, forcing the word steady. The ferry's deck lights flickered once. The pale white dipped and came back. In that brief dip, I saw my own reflection in the windshield, faint and warped. My eyes looked too wide. My face looked older than I felt. The moment passed, and the light steadied again, colder than before. A soft tapping sound came from outside my window, not the hard knock Cody used earlier. This was light, polite, like someone testing glass to get your attention without scaring you. 3 taps, evenly spaced. I didn't move. I didn't roll the window down. I didn't turn my head to look. I watched straight ahead and tried to control my breathing. The tapping came again, closer this time, like the person outside had leaned in. Then the lantern beam hit my windshield, a warm yellow cone of light, sweeping from low to high as if someone was checking inside my car. It caught the bouquet on the seat and turned the plastic wrap into a dull shine. It caught the edge of my glove box and my knuckles on the steering wheel. It lingered for a beat, then shifted slightly like it was waiting for me to react. Rule 4. Lantern means wrong. The beam stayed on my windshield, steady now, and the tapping came again. "Sir, you need to come upstairs," the lantern voice said, clipped and official. The phrasing was perfect, reasonable. It didn't threaten, it didn't beg. It sounded like procedure, like a safety call, like the kind of thing you'd hear during bad weather when people had to be moved to a more secure area. It was the best kind of lie because it didn't sound like a lie at all. My heart beat hard enough that I could feel it in my hands. Every logical part of me wanted to take the offer. It would be warmer upstairs. It would be more normal. It would put me closer to other people, closer to control. That was the point. That was exactly what it was selling. I didn't look at the source of the light. I didn't roll down the window. I kept my eyes forward. "Then say it from there," I told him. The lantern beam didn't move for a second. The tapping stopped. The silence pressed in again, thick and damp, as if the air itself was listening. Then the voice changed. Not into anger, not into a shout, into something more personal, closer to my ear, closer to the part of me that kept score. It didn't need to use a name. It didn't need to announce what it was. It just had to land in the exact place my father's phone call had landed earlier, the place that measured me in results and decided what I deserved. The lantern light swept away from my windshield and dragged across the deck, slow and deliberate. It passed over Cody's truck, over the sedan near the rail, over the empty spaces between vehicles. It came back and stopped on me again, like a finger pointing. Cody took a step toward my lane. I saw it through the windshield, his wet hoodie dark under the pale lights. His movements were hesitant, delayed. He stopped in the middle of the lane, as if he'd forgotten why he was walking. His head tilted. He stared toward the lantern beam without blinking. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't want to pull anyone into my space, not when my space was the only thing I could control. The familiar voice returned, closer now, and for a second the sound wasn't even words. It was breath, a soft inhale, a pause, then the beginning of a sentence that my brain wanted to finish for it. "That's how you get someone. You let them do the work." I pressed my tongue hard enough to make my jaw ache. I locked the doors again, even though I knew they were already locked. The thunk was small, but hearing it helped. It made the boundary real. The lantern beam swung up toward the stairwell and held there, as if to remind me where it wanted me to go. The ferry's hum dipped again, almost inaudible. The whole deck felt suspended. I reached down and turned my key to fool off, even though the engine was already dead, like my body needed the ritual. I pulled the key out and set it on my thigh. Not in the ignition, not in my hand where it could be taken in a reflex, just there, heavy and real. I planted both hands on the wheel and kept them there. This was the point of no return. I felt it in a simple way, not like prophecy, like math. If I gave it 1 inch, it would take a mile. If I opened the door to argue, it would turn my argument into permission. If I went upstairs just to check, I'd come back down soaked and wrong, like Cody, or I wouldn't come back down at all. The deck lights flickered again, and for a second, I thought they'd go out completely. They didn't. They held, pale and tired, but still there. Outside my window, the lantern beam drifted lower, then higher, searching for a reaction it wasn't getting. The tapping returned once, 2 taps this time, softer, almost patient. The kind of tapping you do when you're trying to stay polite. I didn't move. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth. It was slow enough to keep my chest from shaking. My hands stayed fixed. My eyes stayed forward. I let the fear burn in my throat without turning it into action. Behind me, somewhere on the deck, Cody made a small sound, not a word, more like a broken exhale. I didn't turn to look. I didn't want to see what he was becoming. I didn't want to confirm it with my eyes. I stayed with the rules and the routine because those were the only things that still felt like mine. The ferry drifted in black water with no horizon and no rain, and the only thing I trusted was my refusal. The ferry started to feel like it was arriving somewhere, not with a clean jolt, but with little cues my body recognized before my brain agreed. A low shudder ran through the deck. I heard a heavy clank in the distance, then the softer rattle of chain settling. The deck light steadied for a few seconds, long enough to trick me into expecting a ramp. Cars ahead of me began to roll. Brake lights pulsed, then held. Tires whispered over wet steel. That traffic instinct hit hard, the one that says when the line moves, you move. My hand drifted toward the key on my thigh, then stopped. The key felt heavier than it should have in my lap. I kept my palm flat on my leg and listened for the grating ramp sound under tires. Rule 5 wasn't a feeling, it was a test. Wait. Confirm. I watched the sedan in front of me creep forward. It moved too smoothly. When a car climbs a ramp, you hear it. Rubber hits grating. The nose lifts. The sound changes. The sedan didn't lift. It just glided, flat and quiet, like it was still on the deck. I counted distance by fixed points, because 20 feet is easy to lie to yourself about when you're scared. 1 faded stripe. A seam line between deck plates, the darker patch where water pooled. 10 feet, 15, around 20. Still no ramp sound, no angle, just smooth rolling on the same plane. The sedan stopped, and it didn't stop right. It stopped like something grabbed it from underneath. The body rocked once. The driver's head snapped forward. The brake lights flared, then flickered like the car was trying to decide whether to obey. Then the sedan shifted backward, inches at a time, not rolling, not reversing. Pulled, like a winch taking up slack. The deck lights strobed, bright, dim, bright. Water beyond the railing turned matte, refusing to reflect the light. It didn't look like open sound anymore. It looked like a flat surface pretending. I didn't start my engine. I didn't touch the key. Both hands stayed on the wheel. The rain was still gone, and the silence where it should have been made, everything feels staged. My throat felt raw. My jaw ached from clenching. The voice came in close, close enough that it felt like it should fog the glass. "Just open the door. Just look at me," the familiar voice pleaded. I stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the sedan's bumper and the lane stripe beneath it. Tongue behind my front teeth. Pressure. Stillness. I didn't look left. I didn't let my shoulders turn. "No," I said, jaw tight. The light snapped brighter, and then dimmed again. The sedan jerked as if something tightened its grip. Farther down the lane, I saw Cody near his truck, drenched, posture stiff, head tilted like he was listening for instructions. He looked past me toward the stairwell, like his eyes had a leash. "You left me there," it hissed. The sentence hit the part of me that still argued with time, the part that kept replaying a year and trying to change the ending. My hand twitched toward the door handle on reflex. I caught it and pinned my palm to my thigh. "Stop," I snapped. The instant the word left my mouth, I regretted it, not because it was rude, because it was engagement. The voice went quiet for a beat, like it was tasting that it had gotten something. The deck lights strobed faster. The air felt thick, like swallowing took effort. The sedan ahead lurched again, but forward an inch, back 2. Footsteps rang on the wet deck. Real footsteps, steady boots on metal, moving down the lane with purpose, not the wandering pace Cody had earlier. A deckhand appeared at the edge of my lane. No lantern, no searching beam. Reflective stripes, radio clipped at his shoulder, hands empty. His face looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He looked at me, not at the window, like he knew the window was the point. "Don't answer it," the real deckhand said quietly. I held my breath, waiting for the voice to react. The pressure at my left side shifted, colder then neutral, like something adjusting its angle. "It doesn't need your body. It needs your yes," he told me. The line made everything click. Lantern light wasn't guidance, it was an offer. Familiar cadence wasn't comfort, it was leverage. Blame wasn't truth. It was a pry bar. The whole setup was designed to get one small voluntary motion, one look, one hand on a handle, one step toward the stairs. After that, the rest would feel like it wasn't your fault. Ahead, the sedan's brake lights flickered as the car fought whatever held it. The strobe turned the deck into a blinking tunnel. I tightened my grip until my fingers hurt. I didn't start the engine. I didn't open the door. I didn't look left. The deckhand stayed put, close enough to be real, far enough not to make it a rescue scene. He didn't plead. He didn't explain more. He just held the truth in place like a wedge. The familiar presence pressed at the edge of my hearing again. Not words, just breath. The start of a sentence my brain wanted to finish. I swallowed and kept my tongue behind my teeth. No answering, no following. The strobe slowed. The deck light steadied into that pale, tired white again. The matte water beyond the rail softened, gained a hint of reflection. The sedan ahead stopped being dragged. It sat still, brake lights glowing, as if the test had ended. Metal creaked. A distant latch clanked. The vibration under my hands shifted into a more familiar rhythm, like engines taking hold of a real route again. I stayed still until my body stopped trying to move for me. Both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. The deckhand's words replayed in my head, simple and brutal. It didn't need to hurt me first. It just needed me to agree. The second the ramp dropped for real, the whole deck changed. The air moved again. Rain returned in a steady, normal pattern, not that on-off silence that made my skin crawl. A deckhand waved cars forward, and this time everything sounded right. Tires on, grating. The slight lift as we climbed, the wet squeal of rubber on metal. I waited until the sedan ahead cleared the ramp and the spacing opened the way it should. Then I started my engine and followed. My hands shook on the wheel as I rolled off the deck and onto safe pavement. The moment I hit the road, my phone lit up. Full bars. Like the storm had never touched me. Weather alerts stacked on the screen, a couple missed pings, a calendar reminder I didn't recognize. I drove until I found a turnout and pulled in, just to breathe, just to get my head out of that pale deck light. I could still feel the Ferry in my bones, a low hum that wouldn't quit. Rain ticked on the roof. Normal rain. I sat with my forehead close to the steering wheel, inhaling through my nose, counting my exhales. I called my dad before I could talk myself out of it. The line connected immediately. "Where are you?" Tom demanded. "I'm not going to make it tonight," I said quietly. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice dropping. Yeah, I'm fine, I lied. I ended the call before he could ask the next question, the one I couldn't answer without sounding like a stranger. I set the phone face down on the seat and stared at the windshield until the water streaks blurred together. The salt smell in the air was sharp enough to sting, and it turned my stomach. I drove again, trying to keep my thoughts on simple things: speed, lane markers, the next sign. 10 minutes later, the nausea hit hard, rising fast like my body had been holding it back on purpose. I pulled over onto gravel, killed the engine, and leaned out the door. My throat burned, my mouth filled with sour water. When I threw up, it was mostly bile, but the taste was wrong, salty and papery like wet cardboard. I spat until my tongue felt raw, wiping my mouth with my sleeve. Back in the seat, I opened the glove box. The folded rules paper should have been there. It wasn't. The liner still held a sharp fold mark, like something had been pressed into it for hours. I checked again anyway, then shut it. Later, at a stoplight, I found a thin printed strip in my wallet behind my debit card. Plain black letters, no logo, no handwriting. Don't follow the familiar voice. I slid it back where it was and drove on. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say?